No, that's okay. Thank you, though. Take care of the Seder. That's enough. I appreciate it, Casey. Well, this marks a transition in seasons just because God said so. It's that simple. We had a few months of preparation to enter into this new season. It's kind of awkward because it's not a new year, it's just the first month of the year, but it marks a new beginning and marks a new spiritual beginning. And that's true for us who are part of this kingdom center, that God is going to transition us into a new season, which we are grateful for because we never want to become stagnant or get caught in a rut. And Yeshua, in his first coming that is recorded for us in the historical accounts of the first 5 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Luke, and the Acts of the Apostles. Those are historical accounts of Messiah's first coming. Now, it was an intense time of, depending on how you count, between 2.5 and 3.5 years of intense ministry. Intense ministry for Yeshua and all his Talmudim, all his students, all his Shaliach, the ones he had set aside and followed him, the apostles. It was a very, very intense time. You had a lot of challenges brought up by the religious community, headed by the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. You had the stage of investigation, and then you had the stage of interrogation, and you see all these things transforming, and everything's building to a head as we came to a Passover season, which is a pilgrimage festival in Jerusalem. It's one of the 3 times a year. You go before God in Jerusalem if you have a temple and you are paying attention. And it's an intense time because he is about to go into Jerusalem where there is a price on his head. Things are going to happen that are reasonably dramatic. The arrests, the trial, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the ascension are all going to happen reasonably quickly in a matter of days. And we begin as he arrives in Jerusalem for this very monumental, historic occasion. And if you read it carefully, it dates it as the day that the lambs were going to be slaughtered for the Passover. It's not the Passover day. It's the supper before Passover starts. Just accept that. If you don't know that, just read the Bible. But he tells them to set up the Seder. And they're setting up Seder on the day they're just slaughtering the lambs. So a lot of things happening in that realm. But as he sits down at what is called the Last Supper, where a teacher is going to release his students to go home and celebrate the Passover, he walks them through a Passover Seder, which is what you would normally do if you were a teacher with a school, in this case, his Shaliach, his apostles, his followers, his Talmudim, his servants. And Luke 22, which is chronologically written, so this is very near the end, he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Now, that's an interesting statement when you think about what he knows as opposed to what do they know. I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. He knew this was the day he was going to be arrested and turned over to the Gentiles, turned over to the Roman government by the Jewish religious government, and start the cascade of events where he is going to end up tortured, tried and tortured, and then finally crucified with a couple other Jews and buried, all within a matter of hours. And he's saying, I've eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. And a lot of people who weren't raised Jewish and didn't grow up with the appointed times of the Lord, you don't know what to do with Passover. Passover is coming, and I've been talking to my wife about this, because if you grew up, I was reading, about an Orthodox who grew up in an Orthodox family who became Messianic, and he remembers being Orthodox, that of all the appointed times of the Lord, the festival that is the one which we celebrate our redemption is the most work-intensive, strenuous time you can have in your home and in your family. Where Yom Kippur, which is the high holy days, you got to apologize to everybody and then fast for a day and it's over. And that's an intense time. But nothing compared to the festival where we celebrate our freedom and redemption. Now your house is turned upside down. There's so much work. In our home, I was asking my bride last night, I'm going to eat breakfast tomorrow morning, because I usually eat on Saturday morning before I begin the day, which is going to end tonight at the Passover Seder. And I said, do I use normal dishes and pans, or do I use the Passover dishes and pans? It's like one of these big questions in our house. Can I slice something with a everyday knife, or do I have to slice something? The Jewish people are sitting there going, yep. The Passover knife, can I use a fork out of the drawer or a Passover fork from the other side? Because everything's kind of getting set in place. And if you're not raised that way, it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll come to the Seder, maybe I won't. I don't understand the Seder. I don't know, Pastor. But Yeshua, who understood, said, I eagerly desire to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. I don't know if I was going to get arrested tonight and tried for being a believer, which is what I'd be tried for. Number one, I hope there's enough evidence to convict me. But I knew I was going to be convicted and put to death. I'm not sure the biggest thing on my mind would be, did I remember to use the Passover dishes? And you can go a whole long way with that if you're Jewish and if you're raised in a Jewish home. If some homes, I won't mention anyone's name, some homes you had a meat kitchen and a dairy kitchen. Meat dishes and dairy all year long. And if you're going to do dairy, you do it in the dairy kitchen with the dairy dishes. You're going to do meat, you do it in the meat kitchen with the meat dishes. For those of you that stayed at the Pearl with me in Jerusalem, the 1 year we stayed in the Pearl, which was just a incredible, believe it or not, incredible feat for us as Messianics. In order to try to isolate the community from us, they let us eat meat meals in the dairy area and the dairy meals in the meat area, so we wouldn't bump into the real Jews and get them in trouble. It didn't work because they knew we were there, and they boycotted, and it went bankrupt and shut down. It still sits there empty. But see, it was a big deal. They allowed us to eat meat meals, and I'm Jewish. I know what that means. They let us go into the dairy area to eat meat, and in the meat area to eat dairy. Fascinating if you're Jewish. If you're not Jewish, I don't understand why they're doing this. But I said the Jewish community, they knew we were there. They boycotted the hotel. Gorgeous hotel. Talk about location. It still sits empty. It's sitting there right out. I had a 180-degree picture window overlooking the walls of Jerusalem with a panoramic view all the way into Jerusalem. It was gorgeous. It was gorgeous. And we walk up down the street there around the walls of Jerusalem. We look up and see the window sitting there empty. Because it was a big deal. In Jewish history, culture, Passover is a big deal. But Yeshua, who came to overcome death in the crucifixion, knowing he was about to be tried and crucified, says, I've eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. And then he says something to me which is even more astounding in the next verse. For I tell you, I will never eat it again until it's fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Which means we're going to do this because it's the last time I do it until we do it again in the kingdom of God. Which means from his perspective as a Jew, in the kingdom to come, we're going to keep the Passover. Now, I have no idea what that means. And the people that were listening to him say this, like, I've eagerly desired to eat this Passover before I pass over. And then he says, I'm not going to eat anymore until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And they're like, huh? What does that mean? Much like today, over 20 centuries later, a lot of believers read this and say, what's he talking about? And I don't know what he's talking about. I don't understand a lot of things in the Bible, and I don't understand God. All I know is I understand that in his kingdom to come, we're keeping Passover, and I don't know how we're going to do that because it's going to find its fulfillment. And what in the world are we going to do with that? And all I know is Messiah will tell us what to do. That comes with being a king. We'll do whatever it takes. But also, from my understanding, when I live in a home which my bride is my bride, and she does all the preparation. This year I didn't do much because of my health. I really didn't do hardly anything, and I watched her work all day long and doing things. And all I have to do is make sure, if I'm going to fry something for breakfast, which they'll use a Passover pan, an everyday pan, and she lets me know. Because it's all about preparation. And for some odd reason, the appointed time of Passover takes more preparation than any other appointed time. And the only one that has seemingly more work is Sukkot, because you got to build a sukkah. Which, for Jewish people, it's okay if we can hire a Mennonite. But God wants us to build our own sukkah. And growing up, when I was newly married, we were newly married, and we're in our second home, and we had a tradition. I'd build a sukkah every day, because I build a sukkah, and then I go to work, and I come home, and it'd be down on the ground, and I have to build it again. And so we ate in our sukkah. We dwelled in our sukkah, but it had to be built every day because I'm a typical Jewish guy. What do I know about building a sukkah? And it's all this preparation. But nothing like Passover. And as God told us that we were going through a season that will make a transition at the Passover, it's the same thing. It just took a whole lot of preparation. Now, for the most part, it wasn't what we were focusing on, is what God was focusing us on. He said, I want you to focus because it's a preparation. You have to be prepared for a transition into a new season, because that's what all the preparation is about. It's about a transition into a new season. And when we came out of Egypt, remember, we came out a mixed multitude in English. There were all these non-Jewish people that came out with us who recognized that the God of Israel was better than all their Egyptian gods, and they wanted to follow the God of Israel. We came out a mixed community, and yet when we got to the mountain, we were a congregation. And it doesn't separate those who were Jewish and those who were not Jewish, because God is establishing a covenant relationship. And while the Jewish people have a covenant relationship with God, when he brings us to the mountain to establish a covenant with the congregation now, a congregation of people, no longer talked about a mixed multitude. It's a congregation, like this congregation. This congregation is made up of a mixed multitude. It's really pretty diverse. So in Exodus 12, which is the time of the exodus out of Egypt, beginning in verse 3, the instructions tell the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one household. Now, this has to do with the actual Passover. This has to do with the Passover. But it's not talking about the people of Israel. It's talking about the congregation of Israel, the assembly of Israel, which is a unique concept of Makat HaKarot, the slaying of the firstborn. And he's given all the instructions surrounding the separation of the congregation of Israel. Not the people of Israel, because we were already separated. We lived in the Jewish community, Goshen. That was our neighborhood. But as we're going to come out a mixed multitude, we are set up not as a people, which God considers a people. He's talking about the congregation, which is fascinating at this point in history, because we didn't know there was going to be a congregation. We weren't sure that there was going to be a people. But it talks about slaying the lamb. The next verse says, if the household's too small for a lamb, he is to go to his nearest neighbor and take one according to the number of people, according to each person eating. You are to make your account for the lamb. Got a small group, small family, get with another small family. You're going to do this right. Verse 5, if your lamb is to be without blemish, a year-old male, you may take it from the sheep or the goats, and Dr. Joe hit on this in verse 6. You must watch over until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation is to slaughter it at twilight. And it's again this termination, the assembly of the congregation, not the people of Israel, not Bnei Israel, right? Not the children of Israel, but this the assembly of the congregation. The assembly congregation. It's this fascinating thing. And then they, in verse 7, are to take the blood, put it on the doorpost of the cross between the houses where they eat it. In verse 8, they're to eat the meat at night, roasted over fire with matzot and bitter herbs. They are to eat it. In verse 10, no leftovers. Let nothing ever remain until the morning. You are to burn with fire. Verse 11, you are also to eat this way with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand. You are to eat it in haste. It's Adonai's Passover. It's not the Jewish Passover. It's not Israel's Passover. It's not Goshen's Passover. It's the Lord's Passover. He is going to Pesach, Passover, cross over. He is going to Pesach over the congregation, the assembly of Israel, not Bnei Israel. Never is this address the people of Israel. It always addresses the congregation or assembly of Israel. Verse 12, and I go through the land of Egypt that night, the land of Egypt, and strike down every firstborn, both men and women. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. I am Adonai. So he's going to go through all of Egypt. Now this is the 10th plague. The 10th plague had been visited. Of the 10 plagues, the first 9 were visited upon Mitzrayim, against Egypt. The Nile was the source of life in the barren wasteland of the Mideast. And that was one of their gods because it was a source of life. And remember, that's the first one. Turn to blood. Turn to blood. And I could do a whole thing on all the plagues, how they were judgments against gods. And the first 9 were visited against Egypt, not against Goshen. Because you have to see, all this preparation is in light of Exodus 8, a little bit earlier, verses 18 and 19, which is we're going to begin all these plagues against you. And on the day we begin the plagues, I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people are dwelling. God knew the Jewish community. We happen to be separated, where my people are dwelling. except no swarm of flies will be there, so you may know that I am Adonai in the midst of the earth. So he starts visiting plagues, and he says, I'm going to visit plagues upon you, but I will set apart the Jewish community. These plagues aren't going to mess with the Jewish community. In the next verse, yes, I will make a distinction, I will make a distinction between my people and your people, talking to the Egyptian. By tomorrow, this sign will happen. I'm going to start bringing plagues, and I'm going to bring plagues upon you Egyptians. And these plagues aren't going to touch my people of Israel. I make the distinction between my people and your people. Because at the beginning of the plagues, my people was God's Jewish community, and your people was the Egyptians. And you have all that. But then you get to the 10th plague. Now you got to mark the houses where you live. And when I see the houses that were marked in the assembly, in the community of Israel, the congregation that is there, I will pass over you. I will Pesach, Passover. I will pass over you. God is the angel of death. At twilight, I will pass over you. And it's not because he forgot, wait a minute, I don't remember where the Jews live. I forget, which land were they in? I don't remember. You better mark your houses so I don't kill your firstborn. Firstborn, as you know, in Judaism means a whole lot. A whole lot. Why would he have to have us mark our doorpost? Because he knew by the time he got to the 10th plague, a lot of the Egyptians came to the realization, like, we have the wrong gods. This God is the real God, and we want to rely on him rather than our old gods. And God said, no problem. You want to accept me? Mark your houses so I know you accepted me, and I will Pesach over you. And then you will leave finally after the 10th plague, and you'll come out a mixed community, the congregation of Israel. Not the people of Israel, the congregation of Israel, the assembly of Israel. Because God is the God of all peoples, not just the God of the Jewish people. And the question is, why did we have to go through all this elaborate preparation? Why did God instruct us to go all through this elaborate preparation to separate out a people for himself? Why do we have to do something so God would do something? It's like, really? He couldn't figure out who was with him unless we had blood spritzed on the doorpost? You know, why the preparation? Why does God ask us to prepare when he's going to do something? I'll just be bluntly honest. Look, if he's going to spare us, who cares if he takes out a few Egyptians? It's not like we are on the best of terms. But God actually cares for these people. And there was a lot of people in Egypt that weren't Egyptians. They were they were slaves in Israel, in Egypt, other than Jewish slaves. But they came out. And you look at that and you think about it. Why the elaborate preparation? Just for the Gentiles? Does God only want the Gentiles to prepare so God can do something? Because the Jewish people, up until the 10th plague, didn't have to prepare for anything. God says, I make the distinction between you Egyptians and my people. I make the distinction between you people, and my people. I know the difference. But on 10th plague, I no longer know the difference. You got to mark your doorpost. And I would submit to you that it wasn't the Jewish houses that had to mark their doorpost. Anyone in Egypt that wanted to go with the true God had to mark their doorpost. And they became the mixed congregation that came out, that became the congregation of Israel at the mountain in Jerusalem. In Sinai. There's a lot of mountains over there. The mountain at Sinai. We left a mixed multitude. We arrived a congregation. Not a people, a congregation. And it has to do with preparation, because preparation is the key to what God is doing to Beth Messiah. He took us through a few months of preparation to bring us to a new season. It's like, why do we have to prepare if he's going to bring us a new season? We're here. Some of you show up. Some of you show up because you want to be here. We have things happen that you don't even begin to understand what's happening with our people. Kieran came this morning to set things up, but he was sick and had to go home. Ji Young had a funeral today. She came to set up Oneg and went to the funeral. She'll be back in time to clean up. This is their congregation. This is their ministry. This is what they are doing. This is what happened. Why all the preparation? Why is preparation to do something? And I perceive that there's a story in there somewhere, because that's the way I am. I think all things that happen in the Jewish community tend to be allegorical. I could see what God is doing, and now I understand how God works, because I see God interacting with people having to prepare something, so God's going to do what he wants to do anyway. And it's one of the things my bride and I were talking about. Why do you got to go through all this preparation? And she, thinking Jewish, because it's like, it's not hard for us to think Jewish, because look what our Messiah went through for our redemption. He had to go through a lot for our redemption. It's like why did he have to do that? Because he was all this preparation. And it's like, okay, but you go to the time of kings. We had come out, we had taken the land. We had originally Shoftim, judges, and then we transformed into times of the prophets, because of a lot of things. I won't do that, but this is a time when there's a problem in the land, like there always is. There's always a problem in the land. That's what happened with the judges. A judge will come in, straighten us up. We rebel, and we collapse another judge from another tribe. We kept trying different judges, like we're getting tired of this rotating thing of judges. Give us a king. And they said, you want a king? Here's a king. That's not going to help you either. And so there's this thing. You have a good king, you have a bad king, you have a bad king, you have a good king, you have a bad king. Back and forth, always trouble. And now we're being invaded again by another people group. Doesn't matter who, because it's like that's the way it is. Things always tend to go wrong. God says, you're a good king. I'm going to help you out. You're going to win this battle. Okay? You're vastly outnumbered, because you're always outnumbered. Because with God, it's always a minority. The people of God are always a minority. There's always a remnant that are going to follow God. And since you're being half-hearted towards me, which is better than being no-hearted toward me during the time of the kings, I'm going to help you. I'm going to deliver you. And you're up on these hills, which are called mountains, which in Israel are largely hills in the United States. And you're looking down this vast valley. And in 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 16, and God, there's a prophet speaking prophetically. Thus says Adonai, make this valley full of trenches. Now think about this. You're up on the mountain, there's an army coming, a big army coming, and God says, I'm going to take care of this. Dig ditches. It's like, wait a minute. If you're going to deliver us, it's not like we're going to bring in the backhoe. It's not an easy thing when God says, make this valley full of trenches. That means, believe it or not, make the valley full of trenches. It's going to be a great battle. Start digging ditches. The whole valley, make it full of ditches. It's like, God's going to do something. Let's all dig ditches. In the next verse, for thus says Adonai, you will not see wind, you will not see rain, yet this valley will be filled with water. So you will drink, both you and your cattle and your animals. It's a pretty barren place over there. No problem. Go and dig ditches. It won't rain. Wind's not going to blow. There's no storms coming up. However, you can eat. You can drink. Your cattle, all your animals, everyone can drink. You're going to dig ditches, and there's not going to be rain. But all of a sudden, there's going to be all this water. Verse 18. Yet this is an easy thing in Adonai's eyes. He will also deliver the Moabites into your hands. God said, you go dig ditches in the whole valley. It's an easy thing in my eyes. It's an easy thing in your eyes. I got to dig the ditch. Why do I have to dig ditches all the time when you're going to do a miracle and take care of everything? And God said, well, this is an easy thing from my perspective. And it's like, from your eyes, I see a big valley that you want to be full with ditches that we got to go dig with our hands. This is not an easy thing from our eyes. But it's an easy thing from all this. God says, oh, this is an easy thing from my eyes. And if you're not super spiritual, but you're like me, I'm thinking, if you're going to do something that miraculous, why do I have to go down there and start digging trenches? And God said, because that's the preparation for what I'm going to do. But it has nothing to do with what he's going to do. I'm just going to dig the ditches, and it's not going to rain. There's no source coming. He's going to fill up plenty of water. It's an easy thing. An easy thing. You dig the ditches. What do you mean it's an easy thing? I want you to see that. There's nothing easy about filling a valley full of ditches when you don't have the equipment to bring in. You have a archaic, ancient shovel, which is not a metal spade that you're carrying with you because you're going to war. This is wooden stuff, and you're scraping out ditches in the valley. Why? Because God said, make a preparation. I'm going to do something. Prepare. I'm going to do something. You got to understand, from my perspective, God says this is easy. And we're thinking, from your perspective, we got to dig the ditches. You're just going to do a miracle. Why don't you include the ditches in the miracle? And I want you to know something. If we didn't make the preparation, we wouldn't have seen the miracle. And our preparation had practically nothing to do with the miracle, except God said, do this preparation because I'm going to do a miracle. And his ways are not our ways. Why do we have to prepare when God's going to do a miracle? And then there's a famine in the land. You all know the story. There's no rain, there's no water, and the prophet goes into a widow who doesn't have anything. And God said, go stay with this widow who has nothing. And he goes and said, your job is to feed me. She said, feed you. Feed you. I'm running out of everything. I got one thing of oil, and we're going to cook this one meal and die. That's what her. And he said, no. Your job is to feed me. God said, your job is to feed me. Your job is to feed me. And in verse 4, he gives her the instruction. Here's how you prepare for what God has done. Go borrow for yourself vessels from all your neighbors. Empty jars, not just a few. Go borrow from your neighbors, and don't stop. You don't just get a few. Get all you can get from your neighbors, because God's going to do a miracle. If God spoke to you and say, go to all your neighbors and get something because God wants to do a miracle, you think, if he's going to do a miracle, why do I have to deal with my neighbors who are in the same economy that I'm in? I'm going to knock on their door. I need some of your stuff because times are hard. Why do you need it? Because God's going to do a miracle. So if God's going to do a miracle, why do you need my stuff? No, you don't understand. I need your stuff. And then he says, then when you gather all these empty vessels, the next verse, where am I? Then go inside and shut the door behind you. In other words, come back in, close the door, you, your sons, and pour all those vessels, setting aside those that are full. So go out, borrow all the vessels you can, come inside, close the door, bring your family in here, and start pouring your one vial of oil into all these other vessels of oil. And in the next verse, when the vessels were full, she said to her sons, bring another vessel. This is cool. This is working. That's why we bring some more vessels in. But they said to her, there isn't another vessel. So the oil stopped. And if you really think about this, God's going to do a miracle by supplying the oil that is needed so we can keep eating. If he's going to do the miracle, why is it dependent on how many empty vessels we gather? Can't he just make this one vessel last? Did you ever think of that? I'm Jewish. I think like that. I have this jar of oil. Go buy 100 jars. We'll fill them up. If you're going to keep filling them up, why don't we just use one jar? I don't have to mess with my neighbors, and I'll keep pouring. You just make it keep lasting. If you're going to do a miracle, why is it dependent on something I do, as Bob said? Why the preparation? And I want you to notice something. He did the miracle that she had been promised, but only as much as she had prepared for. I want to say that again. God had promised her a miracle, and he was going to do a miracle for her that would be as big as she prepared for. And it would not go beyond what she had prepared for. God faces no limitations, but we face a limitation of what God can do that he promised me, dependent upon how much I prepare for what he said he was going to do, because he only do for me as much as I prepared for, which means it's incumbent on me to do something so God will do what he promised. Why? I don't know why. I love to give you, I listen to a lot of radio, usually Christian radio, and it's like one of the problems on radio, you have to have an answer for everything. And I listened to them talking, I said, what? That's a good answer, but it doesn't make any sense. I hear people say all this stuff, it's like, that's why I'm not on the radio. I dig myself a hole. I start cutting, when I used to do that on WKZM, I had a Shalom and Yeshua, a weekend teaching that I did with a large following against some of the Christian community. And it's one of those, and I would grow in it. Trouble is, if I was still doing that, don't run any reruns because my theology changed since I taught that one. And that's ridiculous. What I taught was ridiculous because what I think today is not what I thought, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 1 year ago, yesterday. God just keeps doing these things, and as I don't understand God. I have a big God. I want a God that I can't understand. And because of that, if he says, I'm going to receive a tremendous blessing just as much as I prepare for, and no more. No, just give me all you want to give me. I don't want any of the miracle dependent upon what I do to prepare. I'm open. Just give me the miracle. Don't limit your miracle but what I do in preparation. He says, no. You have to prepare, and I will bless you for as much as you have prepared for and no more. I talk to a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people in ministry, a lot of Christians. I talk to them. It's my circle of communication. And these people say things, and I thought, wow. We had a Seder at the Baptist church when was it? Saturday? Last Saturday night. And I walked around the tables, and people ask questions they always can. And now I'm trying to figure out how can I answer this without being offensive. Because the question is not formatted in a way that comfortably fits me. And I'm very, very careful because I'm in a church. I'm subservient to the church. I don't care what my calling is. If I go to another man's church, I am subservient to that pastor and that church. In this case, Ray and Nancy were my overseers. And I would not overstep their bounds. Here, I'll just straighten them out. But at the Baptist church, I do what I'm told to do. Without question, I know my place. But I also know the Bible. I don't understand. God's going to do this. He's promised us tremendous miracle. He has promised that to us. He has spoken that into us. And how often is the miracle predicated on my preparation to receive the miracle? Because very often, dig ditches, and then you'll see the miracle. It's a small thing, right? Gather empty vessels. And when you get to the last vessels, give me more. This is fun. No, that's it. That's all you get. You only get what you're prepared for. And we don't want to get what we prepared for. We want to get everything that I want God to give me everything He promised me. And let's forget about my preparation. I'm not totally holy all the time, but at least once a week I pay some attention. And I want God to bless me. And He said, I'll bless you for what you prepared for. In 2 King, you have the Syrian that has leprosy to come down and see. He wants to be healed of leprosy because he knows the God of Israel is a God. Not like his Syrian God. He knows the God of Israel can do these things, although the God had never healed anyone of leprosy until after the giving. Since from the giving of the Torah till then, God had never, before the giving of the Torah, He cured the leprosy of Miriam. Okay, I haven't forgotten that. But once He gave us the Torah to explain what to do if a leper was healed, no leper got healed. But somehow this Syrian big shot knew that the God of Israel can heal leprosy, and he hears this. There's this prophet named Elisha, however you want to say his name. He does miracles, and I need a miracle. And I'm not a Jew, but I'm an important Syrian. I'm important. I know I'm important, so I'll go get that prophet to heal my leprosy. And he's coming down, and he's going to straighten this prophet out. I'm a big shot. You heal my leprosy. He had faith in the prophet. Some of us do that. I trust in this person, that person. Some of you trust in me. Lots of luck. And so the Syrian general Naaman is coming down to see the prophet Elisha in chapter 5 of 2 Kings, verse 9. He came with his horses and chariots and stood in the doorway of the house of Elisha. He comes down, a whole entourage, chariots, horses. This is an important person. And next verse, Elisha sends a messenger out to him and said, go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored and will be clean. He doesn't even bother to show up. He doesn't hear the prepared speech. I am the great Syrian Naaman. I want you to heal me of leprosy. God sends a guy out and says, look, go dip in the Jordan River, 7 times. Your flesh will be stored. You'll be clean. God's going to do a miracle. Yeah, God's going to do a miracle for you. It's okay. God's going to do you a miracle. Yeah. The prophet says, go ahead and dip yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, which is not the most impressive river in the Mideast. If you've ever been to the Jordan River, it's like, that's the Jordan River? You could jump over in places. It's in the United States, it would be called a creek, which is an Appalachian way of saying creek. And in the next verse, Naaman was angered and walked away. So I thought, surely he would come out to me, stand and call on the name of his night God, and wave his hand over the spot and cure the Zaharat. He had it all figured out. The prophet would come out, stand, call on Adonai his God, and wave his hand. He knew he couldn't touch him because it would make him unclean, right? Wave his hand. He knew what was going to happen. Instead, he sends his lackey out to tell me, go dip in the Jordan River. Do you understand? In his mind, that's not the way it's going to work. Now, the word of the prophet, yeah, God's going to heal you. It didn't even come from the prophet. It came from one of his guys. Be like me sending Joe out. Go tell the person that that's okay, God's going to intervene. It's like, no, I want Rabbi Judah to say he's going to intervene, and I want him to just come out and just make a proclamation. And like, I'm going to dip, this river, this Jewish river is not really all that great compared to the rivers we have north of there in the Assyrian region. You have a couple of large rivers. And it's like, why do I have to do that? Because that's in preparation for God doing the miracle. And I got news for you. A lot of people have been in the Jordan River. And the Lake Kinneret means harp. The Sea of Galilee, that you only see in the Galilean United States, we call it lake. It's Lake Kinneret. It's shaped like a harp. And if you've been up to Caesarea Philippi, that's where it starts trickling out through the rock into Caesarea Philippi. And it starts out just as these drops and drizzles and becomes a lake, and then it goes down. It's not that big of a deal. And a lot of people have been immersed. Even if you go all the way down, which is now open since the Jordanians have started behaving themselves, you can go down where Israel crossed in. If you've been on my tours, recent tours, that opened up. Couldn't go there earlier because the Jordanians would shoot at you. But we go down there. It's where we came through the mountain, crossed into the land. That's where the immerser, Yochanan, was doing immersions. You can go get immersed where Yeshua was immersed. You can do it. It's a little... If you remember, on the other side, there was a baptismal site. They had outhouses. They had benches to sit on and watch the people get immersed. Because that's the Jordanian side, and there wasn't anything on the Jewish side, because anyone on the Jewish side got shot. Well, then they opened it up after the peace with Jordan took on enough that there wasn't going to be more shooting. Everyone wants to go to the Jewish side, where they don't have any benches to sit on. You look across, there's this empty place with benches, because why go to the Jordanian side to get immersed when you go to the Jewish side and get immersed? Because the only thing you had to worry about was the Jordanians shooting at you. Since they're not shooting more, we must go to the Jewish side, because there it's peace and safety. And after all, that's the side that Yeshua chose. So you go there and you dip in the water. The only person that's ever been healed of leprosy dipping in the water was the Syrian general Naaman. It doesn't heal you, but God said, I'm going to heal you. Here's how you prepare. Go dip in the water. Well, it's not very impressive. But you know what? If you're going to be healed as much as you prepare for. You want to be healed? No problem, I'll heal you. Go do this. He said, what do you mean go do that? I'm a big shot. I can go dip in this river. I can go up to the Tigris. I can go to the Euphrates. I can go up to the rivers. And what, this little trickle of water? Oh, no. God said, you want to be healed? That's how you prepare. I don't want to prepare. I want something flashy. I want to give his testimony. I went down, and Elisha the prophet waved his hand, called on God, and said, be healed, and I was healed. Great testimony. What'd you do? I went down and dipped in this dinky little river, and I was healed. It's like, what? You know, we want a better testimony. And it's like, God doesn't care with our testimony. He cares with how much do you prepare for him to move, because he's promised to move, but he will only move as much as you prepare. As much as you prepare. One of the things you have learned, I give you credit for those of you who paid attention in this time of preparation coming up. You've learned to recognize the presence of the Spirit of God early, and you react. You're doing real good at that. You sense God and say, yes, he's manifested his presence, and you have learned to do that. Don't lose that. Because that was a preparation. God's not going to show up if we don't pay attention to him showing up. If we don't appreciate him showing up. The first thing is a teaching. Learn if God's going to start manifesting his presence. Jump in. He's manifesting his presence. That's your preparation. If you want to see God do things, start by recognizing when God is available to do things. Because he doesn't manifest his presence to do things, he manifests his presence to prepare us so he can do things. But he will never do things that we haven't prepared for. And I talk to a lot of Messianic leaders around the world because a lot of people, there's a couple congregations where the Spirit of God's doing something. And it's this congregation with Rabbi Judah and it's Asher Intrater, who had two congregations, one in Tel Aviv, one in Jerusalem. And God just started doing something that's like, well, wait a minute. How do you get that to happen? How do you do that? How do you make that work? And then both of us, the people that the other congregations that surround us, because there's two groups, the American group, the Israeli group, saw God doing something and say, well, we're not totally comfortable with that. You know how many people have decided to leave this congregation? For two reasons. We're too Jewish or we're not Jewish enough. And I've talked to some of these people who have left. Well, I don't approve of the way you're doing things. I said, there's your problem. I'm not doing things. God's doing things. I'm not sure I approve of the way God does things. But I also am small enough to recognize if God wants to do things, he could do things without explaining it to me. And I talk to people. And I always ask the same question. If you see me doing something, if you see Beth Messiah doing something that is non-biblical, point it out to me. Jewish, not Jewish. My daughter went to a Jewish jeweler to work on one of Isaiah's ring, who had a star. It has a Star of David on it. And what did he say? Are you really Jewish? Are you Jewish? Or like, are you that kind of Jew? And being raised, it's just like, huh? Are you Jewish? Because he's seen too much of, that kind of Jew that has some Yiddishkeit. And I don't want to say anything because I'll embarrass people. People who think the key to being Jewish is to put on something Jewish, wear something Jewish, put on a talit, wear a Star of David, do all these things, and then I'm more authentic than the Christian family I came out of. And it's like, yeah. And it's like, are you Jewish or what? Like, what are you? Because there's enough of them that, once again, we're in the minority, and they say, what are you? I've been trying to think about that. What do we say that we are? Because Messianic Jewish means something. But I can't say I'm just Jewish because I'm not Jewish, because most of the Jewish community doesn't agree with me. I'm certainly not a Christian because I don't agree with them. So I'm thinking maybe we should call ourselves biblical. I'm biblical. Because that's what I tell people. You're worried I'm Jewish, I'm not Jewish. Look, I am what I am. I'm sorry. I am what I am. I can't help. It's like my wife. She can't help. She thinks Jewish. She doesn't say, what would you say? It's just she says things and they're brilliant. She's a Cohen to the root. She thinks, begin to see. And we do these things, and we do it. And it's like people get these strange ideas of what I have to do. And I tell you what I have to do. I have to do what God says to do to prepare. And I will only get what he prepares for. And if I make enough preparation, he will come and do something. And he doesn't always tell me what he's going to do. It's what we're coming into a new season. Let me tell you what the new season is. I don't know. But it's a new season. And we need to get together and talk about what the new season is. I have some ideas, but they're kind of radical. And I know a direction I feel like we need to go, except I know how many people it's going to offend. And I do think that way. I think, are we supposed to do this? I think, boy, if we do this, I'm going to offend a lot of people. And it's like, well, Yeshua offended a lot of people. Mostly the religious. So do I want to do this? I don't know. There's nothing easy with you. This is a diverse group. I can get away with like anything, but if I let something happen that I'm not in control, then that Cecilia's in control of or something, then all of a sudden, like, whoa, you know? Because she's one of my table leaders. She was the best person for the job. Thank you for volunteering. See, even in the spiritual realm, when God was dealing with his prophets, he was always talking about, you prepare, I'll do something. What is predicated on him doing something? How much we prepare for? And the prophet Yoel, which is one of the most beautiful prophecies of restoration. It's a beautiful prophecy of restoration. Study Yoel. It talks about a lot of things. It says, I'm going to drive you into countries and out there where you are gone and almost forgotten. And you almost forget me. That's where I'll start to bring the revival and bring you back to land. And in chapter 2, beginning in verse 12, yet even now it's a declaration of Adonai, turn to me with all your heart, with fasting, weeping, lamenting. Turn to me with all your heart, fasting, weeping, lamenting. Verse 13, rend your heart, not your garments. Too often, if you're Jewish, if you're mourning, you tear your clothes. It's a very, very Jewish thing to do. Rend your heart, not your garments. We were good at religious things. Oh, I'll put on sackcloth, I'll throw ashes, I'll do all this stuff. He says, no, rend your heart, not your garments. Turn to Adonai. Turn to Adonai. Turn to Adonai. It's a Jewish book. Just turn. It's that teshuvah. Turn to Adonai your God. He is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abundant in mercy, relenting about the calamity due. Verse 14, who knows, he may turn and relent and may leave a blessing behind him. So there may be a grain offering and drink offering for Adonai your God. And just look at the terminology that he's using. We're struggling with our relationship with God. Rend your heart, not your garments. Turn. It takes something you have to do. You have to turn, which is a direction change. He is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abundant, in relenting about the calamity due. He said, I'm bringing judgment, I'm bringing judgment, I'm bringing judgment. That's okay, turn to him with your whole heart. I'm on the next verse, verse 14. Who knows? He may relent and he may turn and relent. It's a picture of you turn to God, he turns to you. But he doesn't turn to you until you turn to him. Now it's a picture because God doesn't have to turn. You understand that? God can't turn. He's omnipresent. He doesn't have to turn to see anything. He sees everything. He doesn't turn. He's not a person that goes, I think I'll look back there. He may leave a blessing behind him. And if he leaves a blessing behind him, what's it for? I'm on the next verse if you have it. A grain offering and a drink offering. He's going to bless you so much you can give back to him. You can give back to him. That's the preparation. That's okay, Joni. We'll move on to John chapter 9. John chapter 9. John is an account that fills in the blanks. The other three had written their accounts, and he said, oh, you missed some key things. Let me show you some of the things he missed. And so when you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you're reading accounts that everybody saw. Luke was writing chronologically. Nobody else bothered to do that. John looked at those three historical accounts and said, oh, you missed some things. Let me plug in some things. So there's nothing chronological about this. But as you read it, if you know the Bible, you can put it into sections of Yeshua's first coming. Chapter John, verse 9, Yeshua was passing by. He saw a man who had been born since birth. The disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? And this is a significant thing. No one born blind had never been healed. Only Messiah could heal somebody that's born blind. Blind men had been healed, but nobody born blind. So if you're born blind, somebody sinned. Did this guy sin? Did his parents sin? Good theology. Good theological question. Who sinned? Who sinned that there's a birth defect in this kid? And Yeshua said, no, 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 in verse 3. Neither this man or his parents sinned. This happens, the works of God might be brought to light in him. No, no, no. Do you know some kids are born with birth defects to bring glory to God? One of the greatest things that I have seen happen, and I've talked about this thing before, especially in the Jewish community. I'll just talk, because that's the community I grew up in. That's the only one I know. Autistic children. Nobody knows what to do with autistic children. It's like, why did God give me an autistic child? And I know a lot about this because I have dealt in that community. Mitch and Serena have a whole calling into this area. We once had a congregation just for that particular community. And the Israelis started by putting them intelligence and letting them work in the intelligence field with their own company. But they were so good, they morphed them out into the army because they're also excellent medics. They are the people you put on the front lines, teach them medicine, and when the shooting's going on, somebody gets hurt, they will run over and fix them because they aren't wired to think, well, this may be dangerous. All they know is somebody's hurt over there, I can go fix it. And they go and fix it. Well, they are, and then they start putting them in all kind of branches in the army because they can do things that nobody else can do. And the United States has been studying them. And there is a plan in the DOD, the Department of Defense, to start integrating autistic people, sons and daughters, men and women, into the military because, well, the world has been unsure what to do with them. They actually have gifts that allow them to do better than the so-called normal people. And they say, well, who sinned that there's something wrong with his kid? Was it him? His parents? He says, no, this was done so the works of God may be brought to light in him. It's not so God could do a miracle and impress people. God wanted him to be born blind so Messiah could prove he was the Messiah to the Orthodox community. Verse 4. This is Jewish, so it's a picture. We must do the work of the one who sent me so long as his day. Night is coming when no one can work. We're going to do something. Why? You have to do the work of the one who sent me so long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. You know, one of the great things about this Hope Fest coming up is we can go into the community we were called to. And even though COVID shut down all the outreaches, now we're having a festival for the whole community. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see what they're going to do. It's exciting that God is basing all this ministry out of this Kingdom Center, something we never would have thought of. That's okay. God got his own people. When the Christian community came together, looked at this property, looked at this congregation, and said, this is a good place to run ministry out to Pride Park. And they're kingdom building. They're not church building, they're kingdom building. God has his people, even in the Christian church. And all these people are coming in, and we're going to build things. And we've had all kinds of meetings. Of course, their biggest meetings are on Shabbat. Like, if you want to know what you're doing, go to the meeting. That's probably over by now. And I'm sitting in their meeting, okay, we'll sort this all out Saturday. It's like, Saturday? Well, we know you, me, and my people. I say, you want my people, let me know, but my people aren't coming to your meetings because you always meet on Shabbat. Why? We must do the work when it's daylight. We can do this. There may come a time when it's illegal to do the work. You know, the Seder night tonight, we'll talk about these things. You know, the night, sometimes it's night. And in verse 5, he gives it, while I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. And he's drawing this picture in verse 6. Now, having said these things, he spat on the ground, made mud with his saliva, spread the mud in the blind man's eyes. Okay? There's a whole story behind this about spitting, especially for a firstborn. Firstborn spits, there's something in that. And then, what does he say to the guy? Go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. And so he went away, washed, and came back seeing. In other words, he has no eyes. Messiah makes mud pie, sticks him in his eye. Now you go wash and you'll be healed. And it's like, why does he have to go wash if the Messiah stick mud pies in his eyes? Why didn't he say, now you can see through the mud, or now your eyes? It's like, no. You want God to do what he has already prepared, what he has already promised. What has he always said? I'm going to heal you. Here's some mud. Here's mud in your eye. You know, that's something people say who are trying to figure out, what does that mean? Here's mud in your eye. Now go wash in the pool. Because if you don't wash in the pool, you're not going to have a miracle. Why do you have to go wash in the pool when Messiah is doing the miracle? Why did he have to put mud in his eye if he had to go dip in the pool? You see, the Syrian didn't have to do something and go dip in the water. He just had to dip in the water. Now it's not a question of dipping in water. Let me stick mud in your eyes. Now go dip in the water. It's like, wait a minute. It's preparation. It's preparation. In John 11, Eleazar, called Lazarus, has died. And Messiah is going to raise him from the dead. And you have all these exchanges going on with his two sisters, Miriam and Martha. And in verse 39, Yeshua says, roll away the sin. And Martha, the dead man's sister, said to Master, by this time he stinks. He's been dead 4 days. 4 days. Nobody gets raised from the dead after 4 days. A lot of people raised from the dead in the Bible, not after 3 days. After 3 days, only Messiah can raise them from the dead. Everybody knows that. That's Jewish. And you know, by now, he stinks. He stinks. It's been 4 days. This doesn't happen. And Yeshua said to her in verse 40, didn't I tell you if you believe you would see the glory of God? Verse 41, so they rolled away the stone. Yeshua lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you have heard me. I know you always hear me because this crowd standing around you, but because of this crowd standing around, I said it so they may believe you sent me. In other words, I'm praying so they can hear me praying. And he said with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And he who had been dead come out, wrapped in burial clothes, binding his wife's feet and the cloth over his feet. And Yeshua said, cut him loose, let him go. I'm going to raise him from the dead. Let's go. You can't. Roll away the stone. Oh, no, stinky. No, you roll away the stone and I'll raise him from the dead. Why don't you just raise him from the dead and move the stone yourself? Do you think God could have raised him from the dead if they didn't roll his stone? Yes, but would he have? No, because God requires preparation for what he's going to do. And if they didn't have the faith to roll away the stone, they would have never seen the miracle of Eleazar coming alive again. Because God predicates what he promises to do on how much we prepare. On how much we prepare. Now, going full circle, because we have a Seder to get to the Seder tonight. Paul was writing to the Corinthian congregation, that worldly congregation that doesn't have their act together yet. Not all congregation understands, God calls you out of the world, and once he calls you out of the world, the job is to get the world out of you. Do you understand? You can be out of the world, but still have the world in you. And that's a problem. It's a problem being in the world, but you can be called out of the world like the Corinthians were, and they came into the kingdom, but the world was still in them. And he's talking about their struggle. Chametz, he's talking about leaven, which is chametz, which is used in the instructions of the Passover. Chametz is leaven. Lo chametz, no leaven. Get rid of all your leaven. If you've been cleaning your house top to bottom, inside, now, like some of you have been doing for a couple of weeks now, which all comes to a head this morning with breakfast. Because there's a struggle. Which dishes do I use? Because it's breakfast, it's not Passover, but when I get home tonight, it will be. And I'm in this quandary where I live. I want to use a skillet on the stove and a plate and a fork. Which one do I use? You see, if I put it in the sink, which I'm apt to do, and we come home tonight after the Seder, then we have non-Passover dishes out. Which some of you who are Jewish go, yeah, you can't do that. And she just I asked her, what do I do? He said, here's how you do it. I said, okay. I use chametz skillet, chametz plate, chametz knife. I had my knife, and she grabbed it to wash it. I said, no, I'm still going to use that. And the people in the congregation are like, oh yeah, well, I'm a better believer than you are. I'm a better believer than you are. You probably don't even have a separate set of dishes for Passover, you pagan. And probably never occurs to you that what do you eat? What dish do you use for breakfast when dinner's on Passover? And some of you are like, what is that? And that's like, well, that's how seriously we take things in the Hungerman household and the Brownman household. The household, Cheryl's household. Those of us who actually pay attention to things, we actually pay attention to these things. It's a big deal for us. And he's writing his congregation in 1 Corinthians 5:6. Your boasting isn't any good. Quit boasting about how much you know. Don't you know a little chametz leavens the whole batch of dough? And it's not allegorical. It is a letter of logic. You don't draw pictures to a Greek. A Greek will say, huh? So this isn't made to be a picture. He's talking about keeping the Passover to a congregation who apparently knew what it was to keep the Passover, because he brought him into the kingdom and told him to follow the Bible. This was centuries before the first church came out and say, no, we'll do Easter and eat swine. We're still doing what the Bible says and getting rid of the chametz. It'd be centuries and centuries before the church was established. Don't you know a little bit of chametz? Just a little bit of chametz. Just a little bit. You can't do anything. One of the tables at the Baptist Seder, why is this matzah different from all other matzah? It's like, this is kosher for Passover. You could buy matzah that's not kosher for Passover? What's the difference between what's kosher for Passover and what's not kosher for Passover? Easy. The ones that are kosher for Passover has been under the care of somebody who knows what they're doing from the time it was harvested in the field to the time it became matzah, and did not come into contact for water more than 18 minutes. See the other stuff, maybe it got a little bit of water on it before we got around to cooking it. It's still unleavened, but could have been a little leavened because it could have got a little bit of water before we actually baked it. A little bit of leaven leavens the whole. For all you ladies that understand these things, if you get flour and you add some water, it starts to leaven. Flour is a leavening agent. All you can do is add water. I won't tell you what we were talking about. We talk about all this stuff all the time. And so you can't, a little bit of leaven levels the whole lump. If you let that flour sit there for 19 minutes, it has started to leaven. And you bake it, it's got leavening in it, because a little leaven leavens the whole batch of dough. The next verse says, get rid of all the old chametz. We come into the season, if you're Jewish, you understand all this stuff. Get rid of every crumb in the house, and then you start eating matzah. And you bite it, and the crumbs go, it's like, and we won't talk about that. But this is a logical sequence. Get rid of all the chametz so you may become a new batch. I talk about a chametz, but it's your chametz. For our Messiah, the Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. You got to get rid of your old chametz. And then, because they're keeping the festival of unleavened bread, because they are believers, although they're Greek believers, and in verse 8, he brings that to a conclusion. Therefore, let us celebrate the feast, not with old chametz, the chametz of malice and wickedness, but with unleavened bread, the matzah of sincerity and truth. Here's the reality of this festival. You get rid of all your old chametz, the chametz of malice and wickedness, but with unleavened bread, the matzah of sincerity and truth. He wants you to have the sincerity and truth. Forget the next verse, Joni. I'm stopping there. I think that kind of sums it up. We're going into a new season. And we're going to celebrate the new season not with, I got to go back to where I was. Yeah, leave it there, because I'm not doing anything else. Not without chametz. Chametz of malice and wickedness. You know, look at yourself. Now, I guarantee you, if you come into my home and get out your magnifying glass, a feather, and a candle, which is really a traditional way to do it, and you go through the whole house, sweep, try to find a crumb. Toaster, nah, toaster's gone. Can't clean the crumbs out of a toaster, it's gone. Because you can't say, well, I cleaned my toaster. No. If you're Jewish, you understand these things. But does that mean I'm holy to God? No, because I could have done this religiously, and I come here and brag to you about this, although the Jewish people in here probably did it too. I'm not saying some of you Jewish didn't do this. I'm saying all the Jewish people who grew up Jewish did this. It's kind of a habit. It's baggage. We clean and clean and clean. My grandsons just assume everyone that's Jewish does this. It's like the guy that says, are you Jewish? It's like, I don't know. What are the options here? I'm Jewish, but I'm not Jewish. Or I'm not Jewish. And I know what it means because I know what happens out there in the world. But to a Jewish person, to ask another Jewish person, are you Jewish? I ran this Orthodox guy in Israel that says, where was God during the Holocaust? And I started quoting scripture to him. He said, don't quote the Bible to me. My family perished in the Holocaust. I said, well, you think my perished? What did my family do? Look, if you don't believe in an all-loving God, you don't believe in an all-hating enemy. And if you can't believe there's a battle between light and dark, I can't talk to you about the Holocaust. Because that's about as clear a picture as you can see, the battle between light and dark. It's that reality. God's ways are his ways. If you want to have God do the miracle he promised, if we as a Kingdom Center want to do what God has promised to us, it's all about how much we have prepared. And you haven't prepared, prepare now before you get to the Seder tonight. When we start the Seder, by the time we end our Seder, Passover is over. We are in the first day of unleavened bread. And we start a new season. And you will get whatever you prepared for. If you have to do something more to get prepared, talk to one of the leaders here. Talk to me. Rabbi Isaac's going to talk to Agatha. If you see Rabbi Isaac, you could talk to him. Talk to somebody if you need help to get through where you're stuck. Don't be stuck. The Son came to set you free. And it's not automatic. I can live whatever I want. God set me free. I can do whatever I want. God bless my family. God bless this. God bless this. No. If you failed in your preparation, it's time to repent, turn to God with all your heart, and stay focused. I will see the vast majority of the Seder tonight. Enjoy what oneg you have today. Help us clean up and get out of here. Be blessed, everybody. Shabbat shalom. Hey, Stephen. Let me turn this off. Did you get your other...